Portrait or projection? Few figures have been repainted literally and figuratively more than Anne Boleyn. From medals and workshop copies to film and TV, her face has been reshaped by taste, politics, and myth. Today, I'm joined by Helen Harrison, whose new book, The Many Faces of Anne Boleyn Interpreting Image and Perception, isn't a biography, but a study of how Anne has been seen by contemporaries at court, by foreign observers, and by us. We'll talk Anne Boleyn myths, which images mislead, which come closest, where the evidence ends and imagination begins, and how stage and screen shape the Anne we think we know. Let's talk to Helen. Hi, a warm welcome to Helen Harrison to my YouTube channel to be interviewed, to be grilled about your new book, which is The Many Faces of Anne Boleyn Interpreting Image and Perception, which is a very, very different book on Anne Boleyn, not just an Anne Boleyn biography. So congratulations on your latest book. I love that it's Anne Boleyn themed. So Helen, could you just introduce yourself to my YouTube channel and just tell us a bit about your background, your work, and your previous books?
Yeah, so I was born and grew up and still live in Northern England. I haven't moved very far. I spent a lot of my childhood being dragged on camping trips, so we visited a lot of castles and priories and ruins, which I guess is where my love of history sort of sparked, really. Um, I did a couple of modules on Tudor history in my A levels, and then I went on to do a BA in history, an MA in history, and I also have an MSc in library management as well. So I work in the university library at my alma mater, um, and yeah, it's been quite a journey, to be honest, to get here. I've always wanted to work in libraries, but it's taken a while to get here. So I published my first book in 2023, which was Elizabethan Rebellions. Tudor Executions followed in 2024, and then The Many Faces of Anne Boleyn has just been published this year.
I like the way you've got them lined up behind you there.
I do.
I like to have mine on display while I'm doing videos as well. It just feels good, doesn't it, seeing your own books there?
Yeah.
So what first drew you to Tudor history in particular, and then Anne Boleyn in particular for this third book of yours?
Yeah, I did a module on Tudor rebellions for my A levels, which for your non-UK listeners is age 16 to 18 in the UK. And yeah, as I said, I spent a lot of my childhood visiting various historical sites. And my dad's always been into history, but he does a lot of military and naval history, so a very different sort of period to what I'm interested in, really. But I'd always been surrounded by history. Although when I originally was doing my A levels, my interest was in the Holocaust. I was interested in the history of the Holocaust, and I still am. But when I started then doing modules on women's history at university, it's the first time I'd sort of done specifically women's history. And we did a lot on women in power, women and sort of sexual sort of relationships, fornication and incest and things like that, and how that was sort of seen. So that was quite interesting. And the women in power and sort of the sexual connection led to Anne Boleyn, sort of all both avenues led there. So I decided I was going to write my undergraduate dissertation on Anne Boleyn, and that focused on her public image during her lifetime. So then I went on to do my master's degree, and that was how Anne Boleyn was perceived in literature and film. So this book really ties the two together. It's a book I wanted to write really since then, since working on those dissertations, but I never quite felt able to do it. It felt like quite a big one, but the timing for this one just worked out right.
So, as you said, your dissertations kind of looked at portrayals of Anne across the centuries.
Mm.
What question from that work are you still chasing today? Is there something you haven't been able to really find out?
I don't think there's any sort of specific thing, but what I realized looking at particularly the sort of film adaptations is that there's very much a focus on one thing or another. It's usually, in the Tudors, we see her sexuality is very much at the forefront. With Wolf Hall, we're sort of seeing her through Cromwell's eyes. There's always sort of something that's been left out. So I'm what I'm sort of been chasing is there actually ever going to be a definitive version of Anne Boleyn that we see on screen? Everyone has their favourites, but there's always something missing from the interpretations. Um, so I guess it's sort of something I'm wondering is, will we get closer to an interpretation that covers the politics, the religion, everything all at once? Because there are a lot of questions that I don't think we're ever going to have definitive answers to, so it's difficult to chase the answers.
Mm. So you mentioned there about how everyone has their favorite Anne Boleyn,
Mm.
TV or from fiction. Which is your favorite? I mean, talking about TV, fiction, yeah, all of them, whether they're non-fiction or fiction.
Yeah, I really have a soft spot for Genevieve Bujold
Mm,
in Anne of the Thousand Days. She wasn't the first Anne Boleyn I saw on screen. That was Natalie Dormer in the Tudors. Um, but yeah, Genevieve just, I don't know, it's sort of something intrinsic in me that just went, yes, she sort of brought it to life in a way I don't think the likes of Natalie Dormer and Natalie Portman did. Genevieve somehow made her feel more alive. Um, and I love that we get that fire and that passion that just sort of oozes off the screen, really.
yeah.
We really get the sunshine and storms relationship, which I think is exactly what they had.
Yeah, I love that tower scene always stands out for me because you
Yes,
just want Anne to have had that chance, don't you,
true.
of really telling Henry what she thought of him. If
Yeah,
only, if only.
yeah. I think in a way that was just part of it, of them putting that scene in, was everyone wants Anne to be able to say to Henry what she wants to be able to say, and she never obviously really got that chance.
No. So your book on Anne, as we said, it isn't yeah, it isn't a biography. So it's
Oh.
about the perceptions of Anne. So
Mm.
why that particular angle? Was it simply because that's what you'd done for your dissertation? So in fact, why did you even choose that subject for your dissertation?
To be honest, I can't really remember how I sort of came to the subject for my dissertation. I've always been interested in historical dramas and popular culture, and I was sort of thinking about my dissertation topic from sort of 2010, 2011, sort of second year of my undergraduate degree. And at that point, Showtime's The Tudors was broadcasting on television, which was sort of how I came to the Six Wives, really. Um, so I don't know if that was a massive sort of draw for me, but I remember talking to my supervisor about it, about all these sort of historical dramas and novels. The other Boleyn Girl was out, um, and I wanted to discuss all of them, and we had to pull it back somehow because it could have gone on forever. So we pulled it back to sort of how she was perceived in her lifetime, and my supervisor had recommended Stephen Greenblatt's book on Renaissance self-fashioning, which doesn't actually cover any women at all. It's all males. But obviously, you can still apply the principles across the genders. Um, and yeah, it was just fascinating. And then for my master's, I finally got to actually look at the film and the TV aspect of it as well. And yeah, the book just sort of expanded from there. It's something I've wanted to write for a lot of years, but it felt like such a big topic. And Anne Boleyn is so popular and so divisive. I was a little scared to write it.
Mm,
So finally getting to write it and the reviews having been so amazing has been great. Um, yeah, it just felt like I didn't want to write another standard biography.
mm,
We've got 500 years of history on Anne Boleyn, and some of it's not sort of been very well researched. We've got a bit more now. I mean, when I was writing my undergraduate, Susan Bordeaux's book came out on the creation of Anne Boleyn. And since then, we've had Stephanie Russell's work as well about the
Yeah.
afterlives of Anne Boleyn. So there are a couple of other works that have sort of come out as I've been working on this book, which has been interesting to see their perceptions, but a little annoying I didn't get in there a bit earlier.
And if a reader of your book took only one thing from the book, what should it be? What would you like them to take away?
I guess it's that we're all sort of shaped by our own biases, and we're all shaped by the time in which we live. We can't get away from that. There's not a completely unbiased account. It doesn't exist because we're all shaped by what we believe at the time. So I guess it's really important to read as many sources as you can. It doesn't really matter who wrote them or what time period they're writing in. All the sources can tell us something, even if it's just about how sort of perceptions of her have changed over time. And we can still take something from that. It's not just either the contemporary sources or the most modern readings that can tell us something. It's everything in between. And obviously, there's a lot of interest in historical dramas and popular culture, and you often get people who take that as fact, but quite often, it's come from somewhere, and it's interesting to try and track back where have these things come from? Are they from the contemporary sources? Was it Elizabethan? Was it the Victorians? Because everything comes from somewhere.
Yeah, I think each age has kind of remade Anne Boleyn, haven't they? Looked at her with in a very different lens. So
Yeah,
it is interesting to see how perceptions have changed.
yeah,
Now, frustratingly, we only really have, well, at the moment, we only
yes.
have the 1534 medal,
Hmm.
which was damaged. I mean, Lucy Churchill did an amazing job
Yeah.
sort of recreating it. But which image do you think, apart from that medal, comes closest to Anne, and why?
Um, well, there's two I have a particular soft spot for. One is the Chequers ring, but we know that's an Elizabethan image of Anne, so how likely it is that that came from life, I'm not sure. It does sort of vaguely match the Hever Rose in the National Portrait Gallery, as well as the Hoskins miniature. But the one I think probably comes closest to Anne is the Holbein Windsor sketch, which is the one that shows Anne in some kind of undress or nightgown, um, sort of with almost a sort of linen hood or something on, um, which I think was probably a preparatory sketch for a miniature. We have a miniature of Henry Fitzroy, sort of in a similar state of undress, and I think it may have been intended to do one of Anne Boleyn the same way as a private miniature for Henry VIII. The identification is very disputed by historians whether this is actually Anne. I do believe it is because the identification was made by John Cheek, who we knew has met Anne, um, and the inscription was originally made in sort of this book of Holbein sketches that were put together, which were sort of compiled in a book for the king, and were later separated out and the inscriptions copied across, is what's believed to have happened. Um, and there has been some questions over Cheek misidentifying people, but it's thought the only ones he misidentified were people he never actually met. So it would have been difficult probably for him to have actually recognised them. But we know he did meet Anne. Um, so I think it's likely he did identify that correctly. And I do see a lot of similarities in the face between that sketch and the portrait medal. I mean, the medal is damaged, but yeah, as you said, Lucy Churchill did brilliant work in bringing that back. And we do have a sketch of the medal made, I think it's in the Victorian period, from before it was damaged. So we do have that reference point as
Mm.
well.
Personally, I love the coronation banquet plan with the
Yeah,
smiley face Anne Boleyn, dots for eyes, and and a smile.
yeah. It doesn't give us much about what she actually looked like,
No,
but yes, it is. It's just nice
I
to
just
see that
love
she is
it.
there. Yeah.
So what do you think is the most misleading image in popular circulation, and how did it rise to dominance?
I think probably it's probably the most famous image we have of her, but I think probably the Hever Rose and the National Portrait Gallery, because they are Elizabeth, as far as we know, they're Elizabethan. I know the Hever Rose one is undergoing testing at the moment, so
Yes.
that opinion may change soon. Um, but it's thought, I've seen some research fairly recently, um, that someone has sort of overlaid them with a portrait of Elizabeth, and the facial shape is pretty much identical. So it seems possible that they were produced from a sketch of Elizabeth rather than from an earlier image of Anne. So I am not convinced that they're actually Anne Boleyn. Much as I love the Hever Rose
Mm.
portrait and it is one of my favourites, I do wonder how much that's actually Anne, or if it's actually, the Elizabethan version of this is the Queen's mother, um, because it was probably created as a set of, like, a long gallery set of
Mm.
portraits. Um, but yeah, I think it just rose to dominance as an image of the Queen's mother. And that's the one that, when people think of an image of Anne Boleyn, that's probably the one that comes to mind.
Yeah, it's either that one, yeah, either the Hever Rose or the National
National
Portrait
Portrait.
Gallery. Those are the
Yeah,
ones that are, yeah, you see constantly online, don't you? So, yeah.
yeah,
Although I love the John Hoskins one. I mean, that's
I
so
do. Yeah, it's sort of a similar, for people who aren't familiar, it's a sort of similar style to the
yeah.
Hever Rose and the National Portrait
I
Gallery.
think she
It is
just
a beautiful
looks,
image.
it's a warmer kind of image. I don't know quite what I mean by that, but the complexion perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah, I think Anne does look a little
Gorgeous.
sallow in the other ones, and she is
Yeah.
described as being sort of sallow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think she does just have a sort of almost kinder looking face
Yes.
in that
Yeah,
one.
definitely.
Yeah.
So, what's the most persistent myth about Anne as kind of mistress that you think of, and what evidence sort of challenges that?
I'm not sure it's a myth exactly, but one of the most persistent things that we sort of see is that, Anne held Henry off for 7 or 8 years or however long it was. And that, she craved a crown. She had these massive plans of becoming queen. Um, but I'm not convinced Anne really wanted the crown, or that she, deliberately held Henry off as a ploy to get it. I also don't think it's necessarily obvious that it was Anne who held Henry off. I think it's quite possible he wanted to marry her from, fairly early on. Um, and he decided to hold off to make sure any children that she did have would be legitimate. Um, so I think that's something persistent that we see, that there's not really a lot of evidence for. Um, a lot of the inferences are sort of drawn from the love letters, but again, we only have half the conversation there. We only have Henry's letters, so we don't know exactly what Anne was saying. Um, so yeah, it's not exactly a myth, but I think there's a lot of debate over that one, and it is often taken as fact that it was Anne who held Henry off, and I don't think we can be that certain
Mm.
about it. The evidence seems to come from the love letters, the account of George Cavendish, Wolsey's gentleman usher, and some letters from ambassadors. Chapuis, later on, makes some inferences. But no one knows what private conversations took place, and there's no way we can know that.
I think it's the power of like the other Boleyn girl and the Tudors, isn't it? With
Yeah,
Anne sort of playing this kind of game, this sexual game, holding him off to try
yeah,
and make him keener because she wants the crown, she wants him to propose. I think that's so strong. It's hard to
yeah,
get over those when fiction TV are so
yeah.
powerful. Now
Yeah, I think entertainment and drama have a massive impact on how Anne's been portrayed, because yeah,
definitely,
it's open to a wider audience. More people tend to see it than will read the actual contemporary sources.
yeah. So you just mentioned Chapuis there, and
Mhm.
so in your book you consider the foreign contemporary sources such as ambassadors' dispatches. Which foreign observer do you find the most perceptive, and who's most sort of agenda driven?
Well, Chapuis is quite a controversial source, really. I mean, we have masses and masses of his letters. Um, he is very perceptive. He does tend to have a lot of sources at court who are telling him. He doesn't always specify who these sources are. Sometimes he just says, a person, or so he doesn't always report names. But he does report literally everything he hears. Which is, it's quite a good source of information, although you do hear a lot that we should ignore Chapuis. He's too biased. He obviously hated Anne Boleyn. And that is true, but as I've said, everyone's biased in some way. But I also think being an ambassador, and particularly the ambassador to Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, probably the most powerful man in Europe at the time, Chapuis would have been expected to report accurately as far
Yeah.
as he could. And I do think we do need to consider that he couldn't just, insult Anne all the time. He would have been expected to report what people were actually thinking at the time, what was happening. So yeah, we have to take it with a pinch of salt, given his obvious bias against Anne. He was very supportive of Catherine of Aragon and Princess Mary. But he is very perceptive, and he does seem to have people who are feeding him information. No matter that he may skew it towards Catherine, you can still read things into it and infer things from it. So I still think he's an incredibly important source, and he does tell us a lot, particularly about Anne's downfall. And I don't think we'd understand as much of what happened in those weeks if we didn't have Chapuis' letters. The French reports there's a lot less in them relating to Anne specifically, which is what I was looking at for this book. It's often difficult to get a read, and the French ambassadors seem to change a lot more. Chapuis we have for a much longer period in England. I think he arrives in 1529, 28, 29, and he doesn't leave until the 1540s. So we have sort of this one ambassador for a long chunk of time. He starts to really understand the politics of the English court, whereas the French ambassadors seem to come and go a lot more often. So I think it's harder to get a read from the French reports. We also have Venetian ambassadors, again, who again are quite perceptive. We get a lot of sort of comments. Sometimes it's just throwaway comments about Anne. They don't write in the detail that we get from Chapuis. But yeah, I think Chapuis is a key source, but it's important to get the opinions of other ambassadors as well. We can't just rely on Chapuis, much as he's the sort of one who writes the volume, I think.
And I mean, you mentioned about how everyone has their bias. Do you think looking at the sort of foreign sources, the foreign eyes, can bring us a bit closer to Anne, because they don't have the same bias as the English sources? Or do you think it's a combination of the sources that we need to kind of gauge?
Yeah, I don't think we can really just look at English sources or just look at foreign sources, because you need to, if you can get a point that's in an English source and a foreign source and they agree, that makes it more likely that that actually happened. Whereas if the English source and the foreign source disagree, then you're looking a lot more at bias and what is more likely to have happened. And is there another source that will then agree with one or other of the ones you're looking at? So it's important to look widely, because if you've got a lot of sources that all agree, then that thing is more likely to have happened. Whereas if you've only got one source saying one thing happened and you've got three sources saying something else happened, it's probably more likely to be the balance of the ones that agree.
Yeah. So going back to sort of stage, film, TV, which do you think of any of those gets an element exactly right, and which one gets it completely wrong?
I don't think it's necessarily easy to say that a portrayal gets something exactly right, because I don't think we have enough information to know exactly what's right. Um, I think, as I said, I think Anne's passion and her fire really comes through in Genevieve Bujold's portrayal, but we don't necessarily get the political and the religious side necessarily coming through there. Um, we see a lot more of the politics and influence on the king, I think, with Natalie Dormer's portrayal in the Tudors. Um, and Claire Foy's portrayal in Wolf Hall's interesting because we're seeing Anne through Cromwell's eyes. We're not necessarily seeing sort of we get a more rounded view, I think, in, for instance, the Tudors and Anne of the Thousand Days. Um, Whereas the Claire Foy portrayal is very skewed just because of the perspective that we're seeing it from. But again, we see a lot of her influence there, and towards the end, we really start to see her mental state sort of collapse, which again, we have evidence is exactly what happened in the Tower. So I don't think there's really any portrayal that gets everything right, but all the portrayals get something right. So if we could combine all that together, that would be great.
I know it said that Natalie Dormer in the Tudors that she actually, I think she went out for dinner or something with Michael Hurst because she was concerned about where Anne Boleyn was going in the
Yeah.
Tudors and really wanted some changes for season two. So if you could whisper in the ear of a director um, about staging Anne's downfall in particular,
Mm.
what would you say? What would you try and correct?
I think generally Anne's downfall has been done quite well, putting aside the other Boleyn Girl film, because I think that was a bit of an odd one with the possibility of the pardon coming at the end. I don't think there's any way that that has happened at all. But I think generally the portrayal of Anne is done quite well. But I think the downfall, I think where filmmakers and producers trip up a bit is Henry VIII isn't given enough agency. He seems to be portrayed very much as being a tool almost of Cromwell or of the conservative faction. Um, Whereas I think Henry was very much the driving force. He was at the centre of it. He wasn't easily manipulated. He did have quite a strong, forceful character. He wasn't the plaything of faction, although faction definitely existed at the court. Um, but something wouldn't happen unless Henry wanted it to.
Hmm.
And I think had given instructions for it to happen. Um, so yeah, I think Henry's almost he's weakened, I think, in portrayals of Anne's downfall. I think he was probably much stronger than what he is given credit for, and a lot more forceful. I think that the tyranny's almost played down, I think.
Yeah, I think he's made to be as much of a victim as Anne nearly, isn't he? As this
Yeah.
person that's just been drip fed information and manipulated and really believes it all.
Yeah. I think
But
that's a good
yeah,
way of putting it, that he's almost as much of a victim as Anne. I don't think he was. I think he was very much
Nope.
the driving force behind it.
Yeah,
Um,
I totally agree. Yeah,
yeah. So yeah,
yeah,
that's the thing I'd want to tell a director or a script writer is give Henry a bit more agency, please.
yes, definitely. So, which historian do you think has most changed the conversation about Anne? And how does your book build on that or push back against it?
I did think long and hard about this one, because there's a lot of historians that I know I personally have been sort of influenced by. But I think probably the historian that sort of still today shapes a lot of the conversation about Anne. If people ask for a book recommendation about Anne, this is the one that's going to be most mentioned, and it's Eric Ives's The Life Death of Anne Boleyn. I know that's the one that massively shaped me. It wasn't the first book I read on Anne Boleyn. I think that was Alison Weir's The Lady in the Tower, The Fall of Anne Boleyn, which had actually just come out as I started university. So that was the first one I picked up. but I quickly turned to Ives. And although, some of what he says is now disproven or, contradicted, there's a lot of debate over how accurate his work actually now is. I think it opened up almost a new generation of historians onto Anne, because since then we've seen a massive glut of books
Yeah.
on Anne from all different perspectives. Whereas if you look in sort of I think Ives's book came out in 2004. So if you look at sort of the early 2000s and the 90s, there's not really all that much being written about Anne, that I can think of off the top of my head. We had sort of a bit more coming out in the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s. But then there was almost a silence, and then Ives's book came out, and suddenly we've got sort of this glut of historians, notably George Bernard, Anne Boleyn, Fatal Attractions. And Ives and Bernard had a brilliant sort of spate of written jousting. I think it was in English Historical Review.
Yeah, it's
Ahead.
so interesting reading that. It's so like polite.
Yeah, it's brilliant in if you really want an analysis of how to pull apart an argument or how to challenge an argument. That's pretty much, just go and look those articles up. And I do examine that in a bit more detail in the last chapter of my book, because it's just such a brilliant sort of exchange of views over Anne's fall largely. But I think it also opened the door to people being more open in debate and polite debate, I think, because debate can get quite heated, particularly when Anne Boleyn's involved. Um, but the more I think we debate and discuss things, the more we might come closer to discovering who Anne Boleyn really was and get closer to the heart of things. And I think that's all to the good. And I think Ives and Bernard did a lot there in opening that debate up.
Yeah, I love reading those. It's just really the esteemed gentleman needs to know that he's talking a load of rubbish, really.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of the sense of what it is. It's brilliant to read.
Yeah, the just
Yeah,
letters to and fro. It's so funny.
yeah.
And do you think, is there a biography or a novel that you think is wrong in perhaps details, but emotionally insightful, or vice versa?
Um, it's difficult because my guilty pleasure in terms of historical novel is The Other Boleyn Girl. Much as it drives me absolutely insane, history wise, um, I think the drama in the novel is it just keeps you reading. You want to keep reading, and I can completely understand why people love that book so much. I'm definitely not as much of a fan of the film, either of the films, to be honest, because there have been two adaptations. But the portrayals of Anne Boleyn in there just drive me a bit mad. um, but the book gets so much wrong. Um, but it is a good story and a good drama, and it is well written. Um, I find some academic texts get so heavy on details and sources that they're dry, and you really can struggle to read them. I know I did at university reading some of the academic stuff. And it's why I wanted to ensure that my work was, readable, interesting, that people could get through it despite the volume of source work in there. And there's some of the best comments that I've gotten about my book, that it is readable. Um, but I think biography wise, there's just so many that are brilliantly written, heavy on sources, but they are emotional, and you do really connect, I think. And I'm just trying to think of one off the top of my head, and there's so many going through my head. Estelle Perronc's work is brilliant. Tracy Borman, I really, really loved her work on Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth. Um, Anything by Owen Emerson, Kate McCaffrey. Um, I think they have a way of doing this brilliant historical work with the sources, but they bring the people to life as real people. And I think that's the key to an emotional connection.
Yeah, definitely. You've got to introduce your cat now.
This is Ink.
Oh, so obviously heard my dogs barking, wanted to know what was going on.
He does have a sister as well who is currently sitting in the sun.
Oh, okay. So, what new scholarly or popular trend regarding Anne excites you or worries you the most? Because as you said, there's still a lot
Yeah.
being produced on Anne.
Yeah, I think it's
And
exciting.
please don't say my work.
Well, yeah, one of the things I do love is that we're getting more research into the wider Boleyn family.
Yes.
There's not just a focus on Anne anymore. So we've got Sophie Backus-Waterman's new book on Elizabeth Boleyn coming out. We've had works on Thomas Boleyn, George Boleyn, yours and Owen's book on the Boleyns of Hever Castle, looking at the wider family. I know Owen Emerson's been doing more research on Hever Castle generally. So that's a really exciting thing that'll give us more context, I think, into Anne's life and her upbringing, particularly that early part of her life that we don't know all that much about really. Um, and obviously we have new discoveries still being made. Kate McCaffrey's work on the Books of Hours, the dendrochronology testing that's now ongoing with portraits. Um, but a trend that worries me a little bit sort of comes from social media, and it's just how many people say, I saw it on the Tudors or I saw it on the other Boleyn girl, so it must be true. And I'm just thinking, no, that is fiction. It's not actually fact. And often the real history and the real sources are more exciting to read than the fictional portrayals. So that worries me slightly how much people are putting on these fictional sources as being fact, and often they're only very loosely based on the actual sources.
I think they see them as a retelling of history, don't they, rather than as fiction. I mean,
Yeah.
whenever I do a video or an article on Cardinal Wolsey's downfall and death, I always get a comment saying he didn't die of dysentery, he committed suicide. I'm like,
Because that was how
no,
it was in the
no.
Tudors. Yeah.
Sam Neill slitting his throat in the
Yeah.
Tudors, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good example of just how prevalent popular culture becomes in creating the myths that surround these historical figures.
Yeah. So what was the biggest challenge that you faced working on this book? I mean, possibly the fact that you work full time in a library,
There is that as well, but
trying to fit everything in.
yeah, you just have to be very strict on your timetabling, your writing time in. You can't just write when you feel like it. You just have to go for it. And you can always edit and redraft it once you've got some words down. Um, but the biggest challenge, I think, is that it could have done with being 3, 4 times the length it actually is. Just the sheer amount of possible sources I could have included in this book. And there probably are people who are thinking, why didn't she include this source or that source? And just, yeah, time, space. Um, I
You
was
have to
over
do
my
volume
word.
two.
I was over my word count as it was, trying to manically trim it down towards the end. I could have written a lot more about most of the sources that I did include. There were sources I would have liked to include but couldn't. Um, the portraits, particularly, there were so many more that I wanted to include or to write more about. So in the end, I just had to focus on the ones that I thought had most shaped Anne's image, and how we see her, which generally is the most popular ones. Although I did throw in mentions of a couple of lesser known ones at the end as well. And to be honest, the TV series, films, documentaries could have been an entire book in themselves. Um, so yeah, it was just trying to figure out what am I going to include and what is going to have to be left on the cutting room floor for that one.
Yeah, there are so many, aren't there? But yeah, you'll have to do volume two. Yeah, it's definitely the director's cut.
Yeah, and then next time we'll do the mass volume,
Yes,
full volume
yeah.
set.
So describe your Anne, because working on your book, you
Mm.
must have had an Anne in your mind. So describe her physically as well as a person. Who's your Anne?
Yeah. I I've had a few, I'm not going to say arguments, discussions with people recently on Facebook largely actually about how Anne looked, because there is this perception that she was black haired, black eyes, but we don't actually have a description of the colour of her hair. Um, so again, I think popular culture films probably have a lot to answer for there. We have, I think there's one source that describes her hair as dark, but it doesn't specify a colour. And we have to remember that words change meaning over time as well. So I read somewhere that dark could be referring to her complexion rather than her hair colour. Um, I think it's likely, well, how I see her in my head is sort of brunette with undertones of red. So not a dark brunette. But yeah, that's sort of how I picture her in my mind, as sort of a sort of medium brunette with red undertones.
Like the John Hoskins miniature is
Yeah, a bit like
quite
that,
red.
because we know the Windsor sketch, Holbein used a mixture of brown, red, and yellow
Mm.
chalk. Um, I don't think he would have used red chalk if there wasn't some hint of red
Mm.
in her hair. Um, so yeah, I mean, we know as well Anne wasn't what would be described as conventionally pretty at the time. Um, but I think she did make the most of what she did have. Her eyes are always picked up in the sources as being something that, you know, she could engage with a lot, and that she seemed to know how to use. Um, so yeah, I think she probably did have quite dark eyes. I think probably quite a sort of hooked nose almost, sort of similar to what we see in portraits of Elizabeth. I think Elizabeth may have got that from her mother. Um, but I think she probably also felt quite exotic at the English court. She'd spent, you know, a lot of years away from England, the Low Countries, and then a lot of time in France. I think she may well have had some kind of French accent or lilt in her voice as well. Um, and I think that exoticism probably meant that eyes were sort of drawn to her, I think, at the English court, which could also explain why the king's eyes were drawn to her. If Anne was attracting all this attention, I'm sure the king would have gone to where all the attention was. I think she was very intelligent. We have Margaret of Austria saying how pleased she is to have Anne and how bright she is for her young age. Um, well educated, but definitely fiery and passionate, not afraid to say what she thinks, even if her tongue did sometimes run away with her, which we know it did towards the end of her life, sadly. But I think she was also probably quite a talented politician, um, passionate reformer, interested in education. I think we know she argued with Cromwell over the proceeds of the dissolution, saying that they should go to educational and charitable causes. And I don't think that was just because she was queen. I think to argue with Cromwell, she must have felt quite genuinely and passionately about it. So I think she was quite an exceptional woman. But you know, we all have our flaws, and I think in a way Anne's tongue was definitely, much as it was probably what attracted the king to her, her wit and her intelligence. In the end, I think it was a big part of her downfall as well.
So if you had to choose one scene from her life that you think defined the real Anne, which would it be and why?
I think it would be the moment that most defined Anne as a person, I think, was the decision to send her to Margaret of Austria's court at Mechlin. Because I think that education that she had in the Low Countries in France, the exposure to Renaissance ideas, new religious ideas, and being around women who wielded power, I think was a massive part of defining who Anne was and who she became as queen as well. Because I think she saw these women exercising power, Margaret of Austria, Louise of Savoy, Queen Claude. She probably would have been around Marguerite of Angoulême as well. And I think that defined sort of how she saw her queenship when the time came, that she wanted to be able to, build these great palaces. We know she was involved at Whitehall, building there, and at Hampton Court. Um, so yeah, I think that's the moment that defined who Anne was. And I'm just sad that we don't know more about it, really.
Mm. And what's your favourite Anne Boleyn line or quote? And this can be fictional or non-fiction that was either written about her or said by her.
Um, we mentioned it earlier. I have two actually. One is the Genevieve Bujold scene in the Tower of London, um, where she says Elizabeth will be a greater queen than any king of yours. I just
Yes.
think that's so Anne, and I think she probably would have wanted to say something like
Mm.
that, just because I think she did truly believe a woman could rule.
Yeah.
Even though obviously that quote is written with hindsight, knowing Elizabeth did reign, I think Anne probably did believe Elizabeth could rule. Um, and the fact that she says her blood will have been well spent, I think, it's one of those iconic sort of lines, I think. Um, but the other one's not directly about Anne, but it's about the downfall, and that's Thomas Wyatt's circa Regna Tona. These bloody days have broken my heart, my lust, my youth did them depart, and blind desire of a state who hastes to climb seeks to revert of truth, circa Regna Tona. I think it's just there's a sense of hopelessness that comes through, even though Wyatt survives, and we know Wyatt survives. I think there's a sense of hopelessness, shock, the perils of ambition, just a great sadness of what had happened and that he was trying to come to terms with the fact. And I think it's likely Wyatt did love Anne. How far their relationship went, whether there was a relationship. But I think you get the sense that he did really love her. Um, and yeah, that poem just, it was difficult to write about because it makes me
Mm.
emotional.
Yeah, it makes me emotional too because it's written by someone that knew all of these
Yeah,
people.
not just Anne, yeah.
It's really hard to read. I always end up reading part of it when I start doing, the fall in May, I always read some Wyatt and I always find it really hard not to get choked up.
Yeah, that poem just sends me
Yeah,
off completely. So writing about that in the book was quite difficult.
yeah. Okay, I'm going to end with some fun off the cuff questions for you. Three
Okay.
three Tudors you'd invite for dinner and
Ooh,
why?
Anne Boleyn, obviously.
Yep.
Um, Elizabeth I, just because I want to see Anne and Elizabeth together as mother-daughter, because obviously Elizabeth wasn't even 3 years old when her mother died. So I'd just love to see that relationship. And Catherine Parr, I just think she's such a fascinating woman. The first woman to publish under her own name in English. Um, and being, a published writer myself, I'd want to know how that sort of felt for her. Um, and again, with Elizabeth and with Anne as well, I think that could be a really interesting trio.
Yeah. Wow.
All women. I'm going for all
Great
women.
dinner party, all those intelligent women in one
Yeah,
in one
that's
room.
it
Yeah.
would just be fascinating to have them all in the
Yeah.
same room, I think.
Dream casting for Anne, Thomas Cromwell, and Thomas Wyatt.
Oh, I don't even know if I can answer that.
Okay,
Um,
let's just concentrate on Anne. Who do you think? What actress? I mean, you can even go back in time and pick an
I can't
actress
get past
from.
Genevieve Bujold. Does that
No.
this is my problem. So it would have to be someone that has her same fire, and right now I can't think of anyone off the top of my
Well,
head.
perhaps her, but with a different script.
Possibly, yeah. More wider ranging script that
Yeah,
encompasses more of Anne, I think would be nice.
yeah. Okay.
I feel a bit like Genevieve Bujold did when she said, "No one, Anne is mine."
Yes.
When she was asked
Yeah, I can
who else she
completely
would cast
understand
as
that.
Anne. Yeah,
Yeah,
for me, it's Genevieve Bujold. She's my Anne.
yeah. And which single object from Anne's world would you most like to hold?
The Book of Hours.
Okay.
There's no question in my mind over that one. I've seen
There you
it,
go.
obviously, I've seen it, but
Heaver Castle might be listening.
yeah, I'd
They
love to
might let
just
you.
get the chance to actually
Yeah.
hold it. Just, it's something that Anne held, wrote in, probably prayed over. I think that's such a personal sort of item, and I don't think there's any way to get closer to her, really.
Yeah, when Owen and I held them that time, I got choked up then as well. I
I know,
found it
I'm so
really
jealous of
hard to
Owen and
speak.
Kate getting to like hold these
Yes.
books and turn the
Yeah.
pages and see the inscriptions, and yeah.
Yeah, they are beautiful. And I think it's Owen who says her DNA is all over those objects, and it's just so
Yeah,
special.
yeah.
So, Helen, where can we follow your work, your blog, your socials, and get your book?
I have a blog, which is also my website, which is tudorblogger.com. So I post, there's links to all of my books, all of my podcasts. Everything is on there. There's drop downs for each of my books, and everything is linked there.
Okay.
I also have a Substack, which a lot of the same things that are on my blog are posted to my Substack. But there is an additional newsletter that goes out the last day of every month on my Substack, which includes updates on what I'm writing, and what I'm up to. Social media, I am at Tudor Blogger on pretty much everything. Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. I'm on all of those. And if
Okay.
people want to reach out to me directly, my email address is on my blog as well.
Okay. Thank you. What are you working on at the moment then? Because you just mentioned about how you keep people up to date on what you're doing. So have you got a
Yes.
book that you're working on at the moment?
Well, I've just submitted my manuscript for book 4, which is called Henry VIII's Quest for an Heir, The King's Great Matter. Um,
Ooh.
so hopefully that should be out next summer if everything goes to plan. That's what we're working towards anyway. And I have had the first look at the cover for that one as well, just last week, and I really, really love it. So I'm
Oh,
really happy
exciting.
with it. And I'm about to start work. Well, I'm in the research stage for book 5, but I'm not revealing what that one's on yet. It is still Tudor
Oh,
based,
okay.
but yeah, I'm keeping that one under my belt for now. I don't like to reveal too early on when I'm working
Mm,
on.
okay.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back round to Anne. In
Mm.
one sentence, Anne Boleyn is.
An exceptional, forward-facing, incredible woman.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, that definitely sums her up. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Helen. This has been an honor having you on
Thank
my
you very
YouTube
much.
channel and just spending just over an hour talking about a woman
Yeah,
that's very close to my heart, and I can tell she's
yeah.
close to
And
your
very
heart
close to
too.
mine as well. Yeah.
Yeah, an incredible woman. And yeah, congratulations on your
Thank you.
book. Well, your books and your forthcoming one on Henry VIII and the Great Matter. I mean, that's
Yes,
such a sticky subject.
it is. It was quite a challenge to unravel it. And of course,
Yeah.
Anne Boleyn is a big part of that story as well.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Not straying too far.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And hopefully have you back to talk about your Henry book when that comes out.
That would be great. Thanks very much for having me, Claire.
Thank you.